Hello everyone, and welcome back to Wicked Reading. Today I will be reading about Aten. Aten, also Aton, Atanu, or Iten, was the focus of Atenism, the religious system formerly established in ancient Egypt by the late 18th dynasty pharaoh Akhenaten. Exact dating for the 18th dynasty is contested, though a general date range places the dynasty in the years 1550 to 1292 BCE. The worship of Aten and the coinciding rule of Akhenaten are major identifying characteristics of a period within the 18th dynasty referred to as the Amarna period, circa 1353 to 1336 BCE. Atenism and the worship of the Aten as the sole god of ancient Egypt's state worship did not persist beyond Akhenaten's death. Not long after his death, one of Akhenaten's 18th dynasty successors, Tutankhamun, reopened the state temples to other Egyptian gods and repositioned Amun as the preeminent solar deity. Aten is depicted as a solar disk emanating rays terminating in human hands. The word Aten appears in the Old Kingdom as a noun meaning disk, which referred to anything flat and circular. The sun was called the disk of the day, where Ra was thought to reside. By analogy, the term silver Aten was sometimes used to refer to the moon. High relief and low relief illustrations of the Aten show it with a curved surface. Therefore, the late scholar Hugh Nibley insisted that a more correct translation would be globe, orb, or sphere rather than disk. The Aten was the disk of the sun and originally an aspect of Ra, the sun god in traditional ancient Egyptian religion. Aten does not have a creation myth or family, but is mentioned in the Book of the Dead. The first known reference to Aten the sun disk as a deity is in the story of Sinuhe from the 12th dynasty, in which the deceased king is described as rising as a god to the heavens and uniting with the sun disk, the divine body merging with its maker. While the Aten was worshipped under the reign of Amenhotep III, it was made the sole deity to receive state and official cult worship under its successor, Akhenaten. Though archaeological evidence suggests the closing of the state temples of other Egyptian gods likely did not stop household worship of the traditional pantheon. Inscriptions such as the Great Hymn to the Aten, found in temples and tombs during Akhenaten's reign, showcase the Aten as the creator, giver of life, and nurturing spirit of the world. Aten was extensively worshipped as a solar deity during the reign of Amenhotep III, where it was depicted as a falcon-headed god like Ra. While Aten was the preeminent creator deity of a pantheon of ancient Egyptian gods under Amenhotep III, it was not until his successor that Aten would be the only god acknowledged via state worship. During the reign of Amenhotep III's successor, Amenhotep IV, the Aten became the sole god of the Egyptian state religion, and Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten to reflect his close link with the supreme deity. The sole worship of Aten can be referred to as Atenism. Many of the core principles of Atenism were recorded in the capital city Akhenaten founded and moved his dynastic government to. Akhenaten referred to as either Amarna, El Amarna, or Tel El Amarna by modern scholars. In Atenism, night is a time to fear. Work is done best when the sun, and thus Aten, is present. The Aten created all countries and people and cares for every creature. According to the inscriptions, the Aten created a Nile river in the sky, rain for the Syrians. The rays of the sun disk only holds out life to the royal family, and because of this, non-royals receives life from Akhenaten and Nefertiti, later Nefer-Nefer-Uaten, in exchange for loyalty to the Aten. In inscriptions like the Hymn to the Aten and the King, the Aten is depicted as caring for the people through Akhenaten, placing the royal family as intermediaries for the worship of the Aten. There is only one known instance of the Aten talking. In the Hymn to Aten, a love for humanity and the earth is depicted in Aten's mannerisms. Aten bends low near the earth to watch over his creation. He takes his place in the sky for the same purpose. He wearies himself in the service of the creatures. He shines for them all. He gives them sun and sends them rain. The unborn child and the baby chick are cared for, and Akhenaten asks his divine father to lift up the creatures for his sake, so that they might aspire to the condition of perfection of his father, Aten. Akhenaten represented himself as the son of Aten, mirroring many of his predecessors' claims of divine birth and their positions as the embodiment of Horus. Akhenaten positioned himself as the only intermediary who could speak to Aten, emphasizing the dominance of Aten as the preeminent deity. This has led to discussion of whether Atenism should be considered a monotheistic religion, and thus making it one of the first examples of monotheism. Aten is both a unique deity and a continuation of the traditional idea of a sun god in ancient Egyptian religion, deriving a lot of the concepts of power and representation from the earlier solar deities like Ra, but building on top of the power Ra and many of his contemporaries represents. Aten carried absolute power in the universe, representing the life-giving force of light to the world, as well as merging with the concept and goddess Ma'at, to develop further responsibilities for Aten beyond the power of light itself. The cult center of the Aten was the capital city Akhenaten founded, Aten, though other cult sites have been found in Thebes and Heliopolis. The use of Amarna as a capital city and religious center was relatively short-lived compared to the 18th dynasty or New Kingdom as a whole, as it was shortly abandoned after the death of Akhenaten. Inscriptions found on boundary stela accredited to Akhenaten discuss his desire to make the city a place of worship to Aten, dedicating the city to the god and emphasizing the royal residence's efforts in worship. Major principles of the Aten's cult worship were recorded via inscriptions on temples and tombs from the period. Straying significantly from the tradition of ancient Egyptian temples being hidden and more enclosed, the further one went into the site, temples of Aten were open and did not have roofs in order to allow the rays of the sun inside. No statues of Aten were allowed, as they were seen as idolatry. However, these were typically replaced by functionally equivalent representations of Akhenaten and his family, venerating the Aten and receiving the Ankh, the breath of life, from him. Compared to periods before and after the Amarna period, priests had less to do since offerings such as fruits, flowers, and cakes were limited, and oracles were not needed. In the worship of the Aten, the daily service of purification, anointment, and clothing of the divine image that is traditionally found in ancient Egyptian worship was not performed. Instead, incense and foodstuff offerings such as meats, wines, and fruits were placed onto open-air altars. A common scene in carved depictions of Akhenaten giving offering to Aten has him consecrating the sacrifice goods with a royal scepter. Instead of bark possessions, the royal family rode in a chariot on festival days. Elite women were known to worship the Aten in sunshade temples, Aten. Aten was considered to have been everywhere and intangible, as Aten was the sunlight and energy in the world. Therefore, he did not have physical representations that other traditional ancient Egyptian gods had, instead represented via the sun disk and reaching rays of light tipped with human-like hands. The explanation as to why the Aten could not be fully represented was that the Aten was beyond creation. Thus, the inscriptions of scenes of gods carved in stone previously depicted animals in human forms instead show the Aten as an orb above with life-giving rays stretching toward the royal figure. This power transcended human or animal form. Later, iconoclasm was enforced, and even sun disk depictions of Aten were prohibited in an edict issued by Akhenaten. In the edict, he stipulated that Aten's name would be spelt phonetically. 2 temples were central to the city of Aten. The larger of the two had an open, unroofed structure covering an area of about 800 by 300 meters, 2,600 feet by 1,000 feet, at the northern end of the city. Doorways had broken lintels and raised thresholds. Temples to the Aten were open-air structures with little to no roofing to maximize the amount of sunlight on the interior, making them unique compared to other Egyptian temples of the time. Balustrades depict Akhenaten and the royal family embracing the rays of the Aten-flanked stairwells, ramps, and altars. These fragments were initially identified as stele, but were later reclassified as balustrades, based on the presence of scenes on both sides. Inscriptions in tombs and temples during the Amarna period often gave Aten a royal titulary, enclosed in a double cartouche. Some have interpreted this to mean that Akhenaten was the embodiment of Aten, and the worship of Aten is directly worship of Akhenaten, but others have taken this as an indicator of Aten as the supreme ruler, even over the current reigning royalty. There were two forms of the title. The first had the names of other gods, and the second, later one, was more singular and referred to only Aten himself. The early form was Re Harakti, who rejoices in the horizon, in his name Shu, which is the Aten. The later form was Re, ruler of the two horizons, who rejoices in the horizon in his name of light, which is the Aten. Ra Horus, more usually referred to as Ra Harakti, Ra, who is Horus of the two horizons, is a synthesis of two other gods, both of which are attested from very early on in ancient Egyptian religious practice. During the Amarna period, the synthesis was seen as the invisible source of energy of the sun god, of which the visible manifestation was the Aten, the solar disk. Thus, Ra, Horus, Aten was a development of old ideas which came gradually. The real change, as some see it, was the apparent abandonment of all other gods on the state level, especially Amun-Ra, prohibition of idolatry, and the debatable introduction of quasi-monotheism by Akhenaten. The syncretism is readily apparent in the great hymn to the Aten, in which Ra, Harakti, Shu, and Aten are merged into the creator god. Others see Akhenaten as a practitioner of an Aten monolatry, as he did not actively deny the existence of other gods. He simply refrained from worshipping any but the Aten. Other scholars call the religion henotheistic. As pharaoh, Akhenaten was considered the high priest or even a prophet of the Aten, and during his reign was one of the main propagators of Atenism in Egypt. After the death of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun reinstated the cult of Amun, and the ban on the state worship of non-Atenism deities was lifted in favor of a return to the traditional ancient Egyptian pantheon. The point of this transition can be seen in the name change of Tutankhamun to Tutankhamun, indicating the loss of favor in the worship of Aten. While there was no purge of the cult after Akhenaten's death, the Aten persisted in Egypt for another 10 years or so, until it seemed to fade. When Tutankhamun came into power, his religious reign was one of tolerance, with the major difference being that the Aten was no longer the only god worshipped with an official state capacity. Tutankhamun made efforts to rebuild the state's temples that were destroyed during Akhenaten's reign and reinstate the traditional pantheon of gods. This seemed to be a move based publicly on the doctrine that Egypt's woes stemmed directly from its ignoring the gods and in turn the gods' abandonment of Egypt. Names derived from Aten. Akhenaten, effective spirit of the Aten. Akhet Aten, horizon of the Aten. Akhenaten's capital. The archaeological site is known as Amarna. Ankh-Esen Paten. Her life is of the Aten. Early name of Ankhesenamun. Beket Aten, handmaid of the Aten. Merit Aten, she who is beloved of the Aten. Meket Aten, behold the Aten or protected by Aten. Neferne, Feru Aten, beautiful are the beauties of Aten. Patenem Heb, the Aten is in festival. Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, early name of Tutankhamun.